Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History Made Awesome podcast. This is episode 15. We're back again with Ben. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good right now. Just had 2 exams today, though.
Ooh, midterms. Yeah, midterms were this week, right?
Yeah, well, midterms, quote unquote.
Yeah. I mean, we're entering week 5 of 10. It feels weird because I see on a bunch of like social media, on social media that everyone's going through the midterms, and like, it's like my midterm's not till Thursday. And I'm only taking one class with midterm. But then again, I have to do it. Technically, it's a midterm, I guess you can say, from our research with doing that presentation, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
So I am still putting a lot of work in. I think I'm putting a lot more work than, because I'm technically taking 12 units, but I feel like I'm doing more than like 12 units. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm doing 15 units, but like I don't have to go to class. It's more like on my own schedule. But like
Yeah.
I never feel like I have a Friday or like a Monday to a certain extent. I mean, I don't have to get up early, but I stay up late doing homework, so it kind of balances out. And then I have to get up on the days I actually have to go to school. So that's kind of like me. So I don't really have a weekend because I'm just still doing work. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I just enjoy what I do, so it's not really all that good. How'd you think you did on these midterms? What class were they for actually?
Well, one of them was genetics. I'm pretty sure I got about 100% on the test.
Good.
The other one was organic chemistry.
Oh, fun.
And I feel like I failed the test technically, but with the curve got like a B or a C. I'm not really sure. It felt terrible. Let's just say that. It felt horrific.
You know, all the genetics articles we had probably helped you on that genetics test, keeping you alert.
I don't know about all that.
That's simple stuff.
See, these are much more practical applications and like in-depth stuff and
I feel you.
Multiple genes and low penetrance and complicated
penetrance.
things. Yeah.
Sounds very erotic. And then are you taking 12 units? Are you taking one more class or just 6?
Yeah, I'm taking 4 classes. Yeah, I have the genetics one, the physics, which is I don't know, kind of hit and miss. It's like when you learn it, like where they ask us a question. The way that they teach it is, I'm not a huge fan of it.
I feel you.
And then my 4th class is a tightrope walking class.
Huh. Explain that one, please. That seems like a class to take.
Well, there's a rope.
Okay.
It's made of metal.
Okay.
And it's pulled very tightly.
Okay.
And then you walk on it.
Oh, see, I mean, I didn't know.
So
I didn't know they had that class. Is that for like? Are you going like? Is that for like people trying to join the circus, like a circus major or something?
No, it's part of the genetics major actually.
Really?
No.
Oh, I was gonna say.
Yeah. So the guy actually who teaches it is he's a doctorate student, as far as if I recall.
Okay.
And he's a circus performer. He worked for Cirque du Soleil even.
Okay.
In fact, when I first saw that, I was like, oh, he worked for Cirque du Soleil. So I looked him up, and there's like videos of him.
Okay.
Yeah, it's cool. Oh my god, I have my grade back for my chemistry midterm.
Yay.
I just got an email on my phone saying that.
It's like, oh god, it's telling me good or bad.
Right.
You don't want to reveal it on live, do you?
I don't know. Let me look at it. No. Let's keep going.
Okay. Let's push that till later time. End of this.
It'll take me a while.
Yeah, I feel you. So what's that class like? What's the? It's like just physical education or something like that. Is that what it is? Or what? Is it?
What? You mean like what? Special education?
The tie roping.
You mean general education? No, it's just a random class I'm taking for fun.
I know, but what is it under? You know, like there's like history, science, and like math.
It'd be under theater, I think, or like the arts.
I feel you. Okay. And what's the class called? Just type.
What is it called? That's a good question.
It's called walking the line.
It's called walking the line. I like that. He would probably make that the name if he heard you say that.
Oh, okay.
I have no clue what it's called. I can't find its name.
That's funny. That's cool. I know. I have very bad balance. Every time I play it, have you played the what's it called? The Wii Fit.
A little bit.
Have you done? You know, like the little pad that you stand on or whatever.
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but I've never actually used it.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of like little mini games that like test your balance. And like for some reason, like I've played sports and like I've played soccer, which you need. I think sports in general you need balance, to be fair.
Yeah.
And I always get like the shittiest, like the lowest level of balance, which is like weird.
Okay.
So from that, I'm like I always get to say like I don't have good balance.
I definitely have very good balance.
Okay.
Because I also walk stilts.
Oh. Well, okay.
And I'm actually advancing through the class isn't like a set rigid like this week we will learn how to do this.
Walk a line.
It's very like yeah, it's just like the line is on and you just have to like you just kind of learn at your own pace. I'm apparently learning very fast or like moving through it very fast.
How many units is it? Is it 1 unit?
2.
1 unit. What?
There's a 4-unit version though too.
A 4-unit version?
Well. Yeah, I think that's for like theater majors though.
Oh, okay. If you're gonna do like special stunts and things like that in nature.
Something I'm not really entirely sure. Not really in the arts like as far as degree.
I can see that in the arts definitely. I'm not doing any typewriting classes. I'm just doing it.
You gotta try it. It'd be fun.
Okay, I'll probably go one day maybe and just fall on my ass all the entire time. It's funny because like I didn't go because when we were away to Nicaragua, my brother and sister they went to go surf for like the first time or whatever, and I was all like, I'm not interested in surfing, nor am I interested in falling on my ass every like 2 minutes. So I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna sit back and just do research or like just swim in the pool or I think I swim in the pool.
Oh, wait, is it actual surfing or what was it?
Actual surfing, like legit surfing.
Oh, but the surfboard's attached to you. You won't even lose it.
Yeah, but like I don't like falling over and over again. It's like I don't want to break my morale. Like, oh my goodness, I'm a failure. I'm never gonna accomplish anything.
Your very dramatic take on surfing.
I do.
Surfing determines your life.
Exactly. If I was to be like, okay, I'm gonna surf, like I'm gonna spend lots of time on this thing, then I don't really care about it. I'm just driven and dedicated to get after it. But no, it's just like nah. Speaking of that, I think we should probably get into the rest of the podcast. What do you say, Ben?
Sounds good.
Sweetness. So in honor of Black History Month, there will be another article pertaining to that subject at the end of the podcast. Here is a quote by a Black author / historical person. So the quote of the day, or the quote of the week, the quote of the week. This is what the quote says. In the long run, there is not much discrimination against superior talent. Ben, what's your take on that quote, and what do you think it signifies or means?
I kind of wanted to hear what you had to say about it first.
Okay. I should probably say who this is from. This is from Carter G. Woodson, also known as the father of Black history.
Month.
Yeah, or month, and just in like the way in which historians look at Black history in a certain extent. So what I think this quote is kind of saying is that like I think a lot of people make excuses for not achieving their dreams or achieving like a higher status in life because they blame lots of different things for their lives essentially. Like either be like they're not fast enough, they're not smart enough, or they're not any of these other like disqualifiers about their self. And I think what this quote is saying is that like if you're good enough, like if you literally have so much skill and ability, or you have more of a better work ethic, then the color of your skin will kind of lose its effectiveness, or that like he says discrimination against like talent or whatever it is. If you have superior talent or superior just ability or superior drive to do something, then a lot more people will focus on that than what your color of your skin is or anything like that. That's kind of what I got. And coming from the person where this quote came from, it can definitely show that in that light. I'll kind of go a bit more on that after in a little bit. So what's your take on it?
I think it's a very nice thought. I feel like it doesn't hold true, like unfortunately, in a lot of times where people do still get discriminated against, no matter how good they are. And honestly, like even if you're the most talented at the thing that you're doing, I think it's still possible to be discriminated against.
I agree.
but now that that's why I wanted to hear what you had to say about it first. I definitely see what you're saying, where it's like, even though, I guess kind of what I'm thinking is like, even though he was discriminated against maybe for his entire life, over time, eventually people saw him, even after he died, people saw him more for his talent than for the color of his skin.
Yeah, and I think a good example of this is like Jackie Robinson as well. Like he was like one of the best baseball players the United States has ever known. And like before, no one would give him a chance because of the color of his skin, or like other baseball players that came before him. You know what I'm saying? Like how there were so many good baseball players, but they never really came to light because they're the color of their skin essentially. And Jackie Robinson was one of those first people who like broke the color barrier in a sense, and then he kind of paved the way for other baseball players of African American descent or any color of their skin, pretty much to play baseball at the highest level. And I think that also changed how people view race and also sports, but just in their ability to do things. So I think it's going to be a good thing to kind of go through the backstory of this quote. So this guy who said this quote, his name was Carl G. Woodson. As I said before, he was known as the father of Black history, and this is from the Independent. And so actually, I guess if you go on Google right now, he's a little doodle person. You know, like when you go on the Google and you see like a little image. Yeah. So that's what it is. So I'll kind of give you a little bit of backstory on him. So he grew up in Virginia in the aftermath of the American Civil War. He was a son of a freed slave, James and Eliza Rydell Woodson. The father was a Union veteran and relocated his family to Huntington, West Virginia, so his son could attend a new high school for Black students that was under construction, hoping to give the best education that he can give his son. It says due to the financial realities, he had to miss school a lot to basically help on the family farm, which is something that still happens a lot, especially like in when I was in Nicaragua, for example. The family, like our family that's still there, a lot of them still like live on farms and things like that. And it's very rural. And the thing is that like for a lot of kids there, they probably only go to like the 4th grade and stop going. Yeah, about 4th grade or 5th grade, because they just have to go back to the farm and work. So a lot of them don't get the education that that they could get. But I think that's changing. They're like changing the laws a little bit more and like putting more funding into schools to allow more kids to go to school. But crazy to still know that's still going on. So what happened is that he would want to get after it more and want to teach himself. So he pretty much taught himself English, math, and science, and became accomplished in those subjects by age of 17. He then had to go work in the coal mines. It says at the age of 20 in 1895, he resumed his studies at high school in Huntington and received his diploma in under 2 years. Wow, he was still in school when he was 20 years old in high school? That won't work nowadays, yeah? That's continuation, right? School?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is funny. He still got after it, so still did it. And then after 3 years of teaching... What?
So he went back to school, as in he went back to the school.
But he says after...
back to learning.
No, he was able to resume his studies, so he continued. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it says after 3 years of teaching, so I guess he taught at the school?
Yes.
Okay, we'll continue.
I don't have the article in front of me, so it's hard to
say. He returned to Douglas as principal before relocating to the Philippines from 1903 and 1907 to serve as the school supervisor. Damn.
Oh.
Yeah, so I guess he wanted to continue to get more education, so he got his bachelor's literature degree from Barrow College, Kentucky, received honors from the University of Chicago, and completed a history PhD at Harvard. Damn, that's really good. That's really good to do. Yeah.
Harvard's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, and you get honors, receive honors. From a well-distinguished university at Chicago. So then he would go on. He was only the second African American to win a doctorate, following in the formidable footsteps of W.E.B. Du Bois, another prominent academic. It says while serving the dean's arts and sciences at Harvard University in Washington D.C. in 1915, that Woodson and his colleague Alexander L. Jackson published *The Education of Negro Prior 1861*. Which is a pivotal work addressing African American history, a subject he felt had been badly neglected and cruelly misrepresented by academia. This brings us to another point. Have you seen the video of There was these students at Berkeley, and
Oh,
they were um, they were protesting against the midterm they were taking because there it was the class was on like development and like economic development like in Latin America or something like that.
okay.
And the guy who was teaching the class, he was white, he was Caucasian, and of course
Okay.
he's got some PhD. He's probably well published within the area. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of these. There's like a couple of these Hispanic students who are protesting it because um, the guy is white, and they feel like he does not represent like their culture in a certain way, or that he cannot totally teach this class because he doesn't actually share their culture or share where they come from or anything like that. So the
Huh.
video shows him like protesting in front of the class, and basically everyone in the class is like, we just want to take our midterm pretty much. And then pretty much they're like, they get on the other kids like, why are you allowing like the white like power or whatever, something like that, to
Mm-hmm.
teach us and like not represent us or whatever, like you're bringing us down pretty much.
Okay.
What's your take on that, to be fair?
Uh, I think that the protesting students were kind of in the wrong.
Yeah.
um, I So what exactly was the class on? It was on the culture of.
It was something about economic development in Latin America or something like that. It's probably like an econ class or like a
So
development class or political.
okay.
What is it
So it
called?
was like a
Yeah.
history class then. So
Or,
it
like
wasn't even
international. It was a social science.
it was a social science class. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, that's like, I don't know. I feel like that's a really big overreaction.
Mhm.
Where it's like, oh, well, you like, I mean, I don't even know. So I'm kind of wondering what they were expecting. Did they want someone who like grew up in the specific countries that they're talking
Or at
about?
least have their heritage or like have their cultural like
What does it
connections.
matter if they have the same heritage? If you don't, I mean, if you have the same heritage, if two people had different heritages, that sounded weird, heritages,
Mhm.
but grew up in the exact same environment, they would have the exact same level of understanding.
Mhm.
To me, I don't know. Sometimes people focus on race a little too much
Yeah.
when it's like, oh well, I don't know. And then I'm picturing if it's all of Latin America, does that mean they have to bring in a different professor for each new country that they talk about?
Yeah.
And if
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, it's like so sometimes people I think go too far with what they want.
Yeah.
I mean, like
Definitely.
with the whole, like appropriation of culture and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, it's like it's teaching a class, especially if it's like an economics class. It's like why would their ethnicity be relevant to
I
the
think it was
class?
more like I think
It
it's
seems
more
like
yeah.
they're explicitly they're doing kind of the thing that they don't like, where it's like you're using that person's race to say, well, you're like you can't do that. You're
Yeah.
the wrong race for that.
Yeah. I feel you. And here's my take on it. Like, I think one of
Yeah.
their problems was like they believe like there's like this superstructure that kind of can like does not allow those, or at least in their mind, like their heritage to kind of show like what things like what's really going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they have family connections or they kind of know people or they've kind of maybe even lived in those countries and actually visited there for a quick amount of time, I bet you that professor has done it, but like he doesn't share it. He doesn't share like the cultural blood. I think I think that's one of the things with it. I think it might be like a larger protest overall of it. I'm in agreement with you that it's a very much overreaction, and what I would probably say to them is that like I think that the reason why I bring this in is because um this guy who pretty much like he was a family, like his family were literally slaves. They were former slaves pretty much.
Um.
And it's funny because like if those people were there like in his shoes,
Um.
they probably would not have gotten his PhD,
Yeah.
and then they probably would have not been able to do the things that he did, which is
Mm-hmm.
pretty much he would write over a dozen more books on black subjects over the course of his career, and he
Um.
began to turn his thoughts away from simple research and his history himself to raising awareness and making it accessible to others. And so pretty much this guy, he would pretty much found Black History Week and also like create the application of like understanding Black history as like its own unique thing, coming from like a Black perspective in a sense,
Yeah.
or African American sense. And without him, we would not have like the type of history that we know about that subject within United States history. And also,
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't have like Black History Month, which recognizes people of African American descent.
Yeah.
And so my thing is, like, I think what you should do is probably use the levers of power that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they might be racist or anything like that. And kind of when I like when he was saying that in that regard, with the quote we just had is like the amount of like if you have like prowess in your abilities and you're such advanced within them, then people start to respect at least your intelligence or your smartness. And it comes to a point that like this guy is like super smart. Discrimination can only go so far, and I feel in that application. So what I'm trying to say is that like what you should probably do is use those levers of power, even though they might be unequal. Just be so good at your craft that like you can start to break barriers not only within your own skill, but also start to teach other people that those barriers can also be broken. And then that also kind of just continues like a cascade of different events occurring, and hopefully us gaining a better knowledge about the world we kind of live in. That's kind of what I would say to those people.
Gotcha.
Like,
I agree with that.
Don't be a bitch and don't complain and get after it and get educated. And plus, you're at Berkeley. You're at one of the best colleges in the world. Like, not many people can get to Berkeley. Like, you're in a perfect position to do that type of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. Like I said, I didn't really say it, but I don't know. I feel like they were going after something that they really wasn't important.
Yeah.
At all, especially if it was an economics thing. Especially, it's like, why would the person have to be from that culture?
Yeah.
Or even if it was a historical thing. I mean, it would be like, what difference would it make if someone was from that country? If you're talking about events that happened hundreds of years ago.
I'm gonna look for the class right now.
Okay.
Oh, it's probably Berkeley midterm.
If it's like, what's the thing that's happening in this country at this exact minute, then I would agree that it would be a much better class if someone recently from that country was teaching it. But if it's something historical or economic, like something more conceptual, then I just don't really see the relevance.
I like this. It says, so they're protesting an exam demanding a take-home essay with significant time to prepare. The reason our well-beings are not put on the line because of our emotional, mental, physical stress that Berkeley is compounding with what is already going on in our everyday lives, according to one of the students' videos. The contents of the class and the way in which it's being taught is not satisfactory, and even if it is, we feel that we haven't had the opportunity to interact with the text information. We demand that you make and hold space to study the voices of students of color, when protest stated. After nearly 4 minutes of non-stop speaking, Woodson asked if this was a filibuster. A female protester was outraged by his sarcasm. She's all like, you have to listen, okay? Listen to us, okay? You talk so much already, okay? Are you trying to silence us right now? Is that what you're trying to do? And one person the student responded by saying, I'm trying to take my test, and the protester snapped back, we're trying to live our lives, white boy with privilege. Oh my god.
Wow. Okay, it sounds to me like this person didn't study for their test and went, oh my god, school is so stressful. And then decided to, like, I know, I'm going to protest the class, and I'm going to make it about race. That way, if they start to say something to me, I can just yell at them.
I'm going to I don't know what the class...
Because that sounds like bullshit to me. That literally sounds like they were like, the stress of school and the stress of the class, and I didn't have enough time to study.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's your own fault. I didn't have enough time to read the book. Well, that sucks. Maybe you should budget your time a little different.
Yeah.
And then other people are like, what are you talking about? We had plenty of time. And she went, hey, you're white. And I'm not. So shut up.
I don't know what the class was
That
called.
sounds like a racist-ass bitch.
Yeah.
Didn't know how to study.
Yeah. It says, they accuse the peers and professor of supporting white supremacy. Supposedly, I don't know.
Wow. Yeah.
What is the class? What was the class? I'll probably look it up later, but
it doesn't even sound like the class is relevant. It didn't even sound like their problem was that who was teaching it. It was they felt like they didn't have enough time to read the book. Didn't have enough time to connect with the material.
Yeah.
And then guess what? Shutting someone down for their race, that's racist.
Yeah.
You can't say you're not allowed to talk because you're this race. That's what racism is.
One protester shouted, have you ever checked enlisted or undocumented immigrant? I don't think so. And it's funny because the guy, he's like the professor. He says he has written about workers' rights in Mexico and is an expert in labor issues and has earned outstanding teacher award at the University of California, San Diego in 1991. Despite his expertise on the subject, students called him unfit to lecture them on the subject because he is white.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. To me, it sounds like they wanted to get out of the class.
Yeah.
And they decided to stage a very large thing.
Yeah.
That way they wouldn't have any repercussions for it.
I'll post the video on the description on the video so you guys can check it out for yourselves. But it's
how recently was that? I feel like I read something about that.
I think it was like last year, I think, or 2 years ago.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I read something about it, but stopped reading.
Yeah. It's funny. My brother's all like, hold on, this is kind of like segue way, but it's kind of funny though. I don't know if I should say this. Somebody, someone I know had this idea, but would it be racist to create a white club, but like allow, like, you know how like there's the Asian club and like the Mexican club? Would it be racist to create the white club? What do you think?
Okay, let's see. Is the question is it racist, or is the question, is that going to go over well?
Is it racist because all the other races can have their own clubs?
Honestly, let's say this. I don't think it's needed.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
Like, because I honestly, so let's say this. I don't think Asian clubs are needed.
Yeah.
And I don't think white clubs are needed on a college campus.
Yeah.
Because the majority of people on college campuses are either Asian or white. So you don't really need, when I go into a class, since I'm white, when I go into a class, it's very easy for me to look around and see 10 other white people.
Yeah.
But it's also very easy for me to look around and see 20 Asian people. I don't feel like those two ethnicities really need a club to find other people. So you
think clubs are really good for like people who, let's say, like they're in a certain population or whatever, and let's say
honestly, I don't really, like, I personally don't completely understand it.
Okay.
But I don't feel like I'm in a position to understand it.
I feel you.
So I don't feel like it's necessary.
Yeah.
But if someone who is like in some really, really rare, someone who's part of a very small percentage of the population of the school, if they feel like they have to find other people that are like them, I don't see a problem with it.
Yeah.
I do think it gets kind of iffy when you start saying only people of that ethnicity or race or sex can show up. That's when I'm like, okay, like, that's getting a little iffy.
But I don't know if any club can do that, can they? I don't know.
I want to say they technically can't, but at the same time, if you walk in and the person's like, oh, everyone just kind of stares at you, that you might be inclined to leave.
So it's more like peer pressure to leave.
You'll be pressured to leave.
I feel you.
I don't think they can have a state. I don't think they can state the rule.
Yeah, I feel you.
At the same time, though, there's people who are pushing for. I don't know. I find this really interesting. They're very progressive people, or people who feel that they're progressive, pushing for black-only, like, dormitories and parts of campus. What? And I'm like, I don't know if they know what segregation is. They're like, I don't feel safe being in a segregated population. I want to have my own space. And I'm like, that, if you go to the other opposite of the spectrum, there's people that want the exact same thing as you for very different reasons.
Yeah, I feel you.
And maybe you should rethink, like, maybe you should stop and, like, think about that for a second before you start asking for it. Because I don't know if you understand what you're asking for.
Exactly.
Or, like, what do you think of girl-only dormitories, which I think every single UC has.
Yeah.
There's always the integrated dormitory and the girls only one.
What's my opinion on it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's actually okay for that at that point, because like there's probably less chances of like different abuses from either sex.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't see what's wrong with it. And plus, like, when you pretty much, well, then again, yeah, I would say that sounds a cool idea to me. I think there's less chances of those types of abuses on either side to go on or anything like that. I don't know. It just makes more sense to me in that regard. What do you think?
Okay. Or well, okay. In that case, should we divide it by sex or by sexual orientation? If you're worried about, it sounds like you're saying like molestation or rape, something like that.
Yeah, I feel you.
Should you divide it by okay, girls here and boys here, or should it be people who are attracted to girls here and people who are attracted to boys here?
That's a good question.
If that's your concern.
That's a good question.
Should it be gay guys and girls on one side and then lesbians and straight guys on the other?
Yeah.
Or and then what if someone's, bisexual, or what if they're like, I'm not really sure?
Ooh.
Then where do you put them?
That's a brilliant question.
And then that comes down to the more like actual debate that people have, where it's like, okay, if someone identifies as a girl, are they allowed to be in the girls' dormitory?
But then you also have to recognize that other people, like, what's it called? Like, other people have rights too, not just the person themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you want a guy who says he's a girl, like, but then like how would other women within the restroom or within a dorm feel with another person with male genitalia, even though that.
So you're saying like majority outrules them?
I would say so in that regard, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very utilitarian.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would say, because like, it's like.
So how do you feel about like the bathroom law stuff?
Isn't there like aren't there restrooms with like its own like unique, like it's like not genderfied? It's like
on our campus now there are what they did. I kind of like what they did. It entertains me what they did. What they did is there is on campus where there's like a boys and girls restroom.
Yeah.
They usually just take one of those and make it unisex. I mean, unisex. They make it available for both sexes, however I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
They make like, okay, so this like and for example, on one side of the building, for like this happens at the Mu. On one side of the building, there's a men's restroom and an anyone's restroom. On the other side of the building, there's a women's restroom and an anyone's restroom.
Yeah.
Or there's one science building where there's a restroom. On the first floor, it's anyone can use it.
Yeah.
On the second floor, it's men only. On the third floor, it's women only.
Yeah.
The one for the neutral gender one always has urinals though, which I find interesting.
You never know, right? That makes sense. I feel like that makes the most sense, because I think until culture comes around, and we can actually probably roll into the next article we have, but like until our culture can kind of like start to understand that it's not that you just can't separate people into those binaries, that there's a lot more work going in. And then once we start to break those binaries, the way in which we kind of organize gender will change, and we won't probably have those binaries. Do you want to move on to that article, since that kind of does like a cool little?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah. So actually, that's a really good segue for us, because one of the articles we have is the fact that the article talks about the invention of heterosexuality, and this article is from the UC by Brandon Ambrose. I'm trying to see who the actual author was, but it is this dude. But this guy, he kind of pulls up like a different other sources or whatever. And supposedly one of the things he says, and Ben, if you want to chime in on one of these things, pretty much he states that that in 1901, the Medical Dictionary defined heterosexuality as an abnormal or perverted appetite. This is heterosexuality, yeah. Abnormal perverted appetite towards the opposite sex. More than 2 decades later, in 1923, the Webster Dictionary similarly defined it as a morbid sexual passion for one of the opposite sex. It wasn't until 1934 that heterosexuality was graced with the meaning we're familiar with today: manifestation of sexual passion for one of the other opposite sex, normal sexuality. So that's kind of like a little tie-in to show that the kind of iteration of that term heterosexuality and homosexuality. Interesting enough, these terms were not like. Or actually, should we talk about like why this post was created? Can I give everyone context?
Sure.
Yeah. So basically, this post was a response to a video that was going online. It was the video pretty much. It was like this guy would go around asking questions with his camera to different people, and one of the questions he would ask is let's see, what does it say? It says the creator asked people if they thought homosexuals were born with their sexual orientations. And of course, the response varied, with most saying something like it's a combination of nature and nurture. And then the interviewer asked a follow-up question, which was crucial to the experiment. He then asked, "When did you choose to be straight?" Most were taken back, confessing rather sheepishly never to have thought about it. Feeling that their prejudices had been exposed, they ended up swiftly conceding the videographer's obvious point. Gay people were born gay, just like straight people were born straight. So that's kind of what the response is to it, pretty much. But so let's just get into the meat of it. Let's see, where should we start? So this was when heterosexuality was abnormal. Sex has no history, writes queer theorist David Haplin, who was at the University of Michigan, because it is grounded in the function of the body. Sexuality, on the other hand, precisely because it's a cultural production. And then he goes on to say that there's always been sexual instincts throughout the animal world, known as sex, but at a specific point in time, humans attach the meaning to these instincts, sexuality, in terms of, like, what does that mean? Like, is it good, bad, or abnormal? So, let's try to see what else. It says okay. I'm trying to see where it is. Okay. So pretty much, the term heterosexuality was coined at the end of the 19th century. It says prior to 1868 there was no heterosexuals. This according to Blank Nithers, author of the book Surprisingly Short History of Heterosexuality. That's what his book is called. So, but the thing that kind of brought this thing together was known as language, and this was crafted by a Hungarian journalist named Karl Maria Kurthbering in the late 1860s. He coined four terms to describe their sexual experiences: heterosexual, homosexual, and two now forgotten terms to describe masturbation and bestiality, namely monosexual and heterogenate.
What? Heterogenate?
Yeah, heterogenate. Heterogenate. My bad. Heterogenate. And he used the term heterosexual later when he was asked to write a book about the chapter arguing for the decriminalization of homosexuality. Straight to go on. Next time this work was published was in 1889, when Austro-German psychiatrist Richard von Kraft, German names, include the word in his book Psychothea Sexualis. Okay, it's very, very bad use of Latin, I would say. A catalog of sexual disorders, but he only in the page, and he had, like, the book was pretty much like 500 pages long. He only used the word heterosexual 24 times, and it wasn't even indexed. This is because the author was more interested in contrary sexual instinct perversions rather than sexual instinct, the latter being for him normal sexual desire of humans. Is that pretty much he's saying, like, things that are considered abnormal, not things that are normal? I think that's pretty much what he's saying there. And like, this is probably one of the best quotes I like from it. One of the best quotes. There's two quotes I like from this article. Normal is a loaded word, of course, and it's been misused throughout history. Hierarchical ordering leading to slavery was at one time accepted as normal, as was geocentric cosmology. Oh, that's basically saying that like the Earth was the center of the universe. I think that's what he's saying, right? It was only by questioning the foundations of the consensus view that normal phenomena were dethroned from their privileged positions. We're almost done with the article, guys. So basically, the author Kath Ebing, normal sexual desires was situated within a larger context of procreative utility, an idea that was keeping it with the dominant sexual theories of the West. In the Western world, long before sex acts were separated into categories, hetero/homo, there were different ruling binaries, procreative and non-procreative. The Bible, for instance, condemns homosexual intercourse for the same reason it condemns masturbation, because life-bearing seed is spilled in the act. While this ethic was largely taught and maintained and enforced by the Catholic Church and later Christian offshoots, it's important to note that the ethnic comes not from Jewish Christian scripture, but from Stoicism. Let's see. I'm trying to see if the author defines Stoicism. Oh, here we go. As Catholic ethicist Margaret Fairley points out, Stoics held a strong view on power of the human will to regulate emotion and desirability of such regulation for the sake of inner peace. Moiseronis, for example, argued in on sexual indulgence that individuals must protect themselves against self-indulgence, including self-excess, to curb sexual indulgences, notes the theologian Todd Salzman Ruffus. Other Stoics tried to situate it in a large context of human meaning, arguing that sex could only be moral in the pursuit of procreation. Early Christian theologians took up the congenial reproductive ethic, and by the time of Augustine, reproductive sex was the only normal sex. So I think what's being said there is that pretty much this idea of the Christian values in terms of like not seeing homosexuality or masturbation in a bad light did not actually come from Old Hebrew or Christian like traditions, pretty much like literally like the Old Testament or like Jewish Bible, like talking Jesus times.
Yeah.
This is pretty much, it was created by Stoics. So different theologians, probably in the medieval ages going forward, kind of create this idea of morality and sex and procreation being moral and non-procreative sexual activity being unmoral, pretty much. That's what's being said there.
Yeah.
It says, while Cap Abing takes this procreative sexual ethic for granted, he does open it up in a major way. In sexual love for real purposes of the instinct, the procreation of the species, he does not enter consciousness, he writes. Now, the word sexual instinct contains something like a hardwired reproductive aim, an aim that is present even in those engaged in normal sex aren't aware of it. Joseph Naquet's invention of heterosexuality notes the impact of Cap Abing's move, placing the reproductive aside in the unconscious. Cap Abing created a small, obscure space and was new pleasure norm to begin to grow. So I think what's being stated here is that the reason why that heterosexuality is seen as normal, because it's seen as part of our nature to reproduce. So for us to reproduce as a species, we need to go with the other sex to complete that task. I think that's what's being stated there, right?
Yeah, or I think they're saying that the opposite of that. They're saying that that's. You mean what? What Kraft is saying?
Yeah.
He's saying the propagation of the species does not enter into consciousness, meaning when you're actually having sex, you're not thinking about, I need to have children.
Oh, I see. Importance of the shift from reproductive instincts to erotic desire can't be overstated, as it is a crucial modern notion of sexuality. It says, when most people think of heterosexuality, they might think of something like this. Billy understands from a very young age he's erotically attracted to girls. One day, he focuses that erotic energy on Susie, and he woos her. The pair fall in love and give physical sexual expressions to their erotic desire, and they live happily ever after.
I don't think anyone thinks that. No. Thinks like that, but I don't think anyone thinks in those terms.
It says, without Cap Abing's work, this narrative might have never become normal. There is no mention, however, implicit of procreation, defining normal sexual instincts. According to exotic desire, was a fundamental revolution about sex. And supposedly this guy laid the groundwork for the culture that was happening in 1932. I'm trying to see if we can speed it up a little bit. It says in the late 19th century, populations of Europe and North America, cities began to explode. By 1900, for example, New York City had 3.4 million residents, 56 times its population just a century earlier. As people moved to urban centers, they brought their sexual perversions, prostitution, same-sex eroticism with them.
Oh no. Eroticism?
Eroticism. Or so it's seen. By comparison to rural towns and villages, Blank writes, the cities seemed like hotbeds of sexual misconduct and excess. When city populations were smaller, says Blank, it was easier to control such behavior, just as it was easier to control when it took place in smaller rural areas, where neighborly familiarity was the norm. Small town gossip can be a profound motivator. So is he saying that like I'm trying to see if he's saying that's what he's saying.
When more people can see what you're doing, you're more likely to follow what society wants.
I feel you. That makes
sense. In other words, like when you're in a crowd, you're just a face in the crowd instead of when you're like in a lineup. Something like that.
So he's basically saying, is this when we start to see like that spike in different types of groups coming together and doing.
That's what he's implying. He's implying when the population gets larger, we start to ignore societal norms and start to do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Which I think he's saying leads to more things. It said, or so it seemed, though. That's why I'm not. I have to go to see where he's going.
It says, okay, so. Yeah. So he says, because the increasing public awareness of these sexual practices paralleled the influx of lower classes in the cities, urban sexual misconduct was typically, if inaccurately, blamed on the working class and poor, says Blank. It was important for an emerging middle class to differentiate itself from such excesses. Oh, okay, I get you. The bourgeoisie family needed a way to protect itself from members from aristocratic decadence on the one side and the horrors of the teeming city on the other. This required sympathetic, reproducible, universally applicable systems of social management that could be implemented on a large scale. So what he's saying here is that pretty much we start to see, especially in the late to mid 19th century, is that you start to see this idea of a working class, like actually legit classes, like the working class. You have the middle class, like the bourgeoisie, and of course you have the rich and the people who are politicians, things of that nature. So what starts to happen is that you start to create these different like the bourgeoisie start to create definitions for the category, different definitions for each category to basically situate themselves within their social hierarchy, pretty much. Okay. So a lot of times, what I think what's being stated here is that they contributed these types of unruly behavior to the working class. And I think just goes beyond poverty and like not being hard workers, that like they need some type of motivator to go to work. I think they also put those types of things like this is something that like the bourgeoisie do or something like that. Something like the poor do, which is very, very interesting. Even to know that before the bourgeoisie there was kings and queens and they used to marry cousins and shit, and like aunts and uncles is like interesting. So basically, instead of it being from religion, now it's like based on a class system essentially.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yep.
Yeah, it goes on to say like if you call someone a cad, you've settled his social status.
You're such.
So they're still treating.
Yeah.
Wait, with the normal. Wait, what? Made it clear. Deviation. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So. Now they're saying homosexuality isn't just a sin now. Now it's moral degeneracy. One of the worst labels a person could acquire. And then it has a quote from someone at the time saying that, call him a degenerate, you've grouped him with the worst, most loathsome species of the human race.
Damn. Let's see. So pretty much what he goes on to say is that a whole bunch of other people started to try to define these things in different ways. So social Darwinism, pretty much, like if you do this, you start to lower like this is like the what's it called? Like the species, pretty much. So that's why
well, so it sounds like they were saying like, okay, in the beginning, in the beginning there was like no, in the beginning it was like, okay, so anything that isn't like you're trying to have a baby, which means like masturbation, oral sex, anal sex with a man or a woman, like all of that is bad. And now we're at the point where it's like, okay, now just if you're not with a woman, it's bad.
Yeah.
But not for religious reasons. You're not going to hell. You're just a degenerate. You're just a horrible person.
So pretty much different. The rest of the article continues to say that different.
Yeah, it goes on to talk about Freud.
And different types of people have tried to define heterosexuality, homosexuality in different ways. So I think we should just get to kind of the big part of this. Like, what does this mean for homosexuality, pretty much, or heterosexuality, or like the different these two groups? So it's funny because he kind of starts off that like anybody with a. So he's pretty much saying that like. Okay, so he says that as those categories linger to this day, no one knows exactly why heterosexuals or homosexuals ought to be different. Wrote Wendell Ricketts, author of the 1984 study Biological Research on Homosexuality. The best answer we got is something of a tautology. Heterosexuals and homosexuals are considered different because they can be divided into two groups on the basis of the belief that they can be divided into two groups.
Okay.
Though the hetero-homo divide seems like an integral fact of nature, it simply isn't. It's merely one recent grammar humans have invented to talk about what sex means to us. Heterosexuality, argues Kotz, is invented within a discourse as that which is outside discourse. It's manufactured in a particular discourse at that which is universal as that which is outside time. So that is, it's a construction, but it pretends it isn't. As any French philosopher or child legal said will tell you, anything that can be constructed can be deconstructed. If heterosexuality didn't exist in the past, then it doesn't need to exist in the future. And I'm just gonna go to the quote that I like. I'm just gonna find it really quickly. Let's see. So this is, once upon a time, heterosexuality was necessary because modern humans needed to prove who they were and why they were, and they needed to defend their right to be where they were. As time wears on, the allele seems to actually limit the myriad ways in which humans understand our desires and loves. Perhaps this is one reason why a recent UK poll found that fewer than half of those aged 18 to 24 identify as 100% heterosexual. This doesn't suggest a majority of those young men respondents regularly practice bisexuality or homosexuality. Rather, it shows that they don't seem to have the same need for the word heterosexuals as their 20th century forebears. And this is my quote I liked. Debates about sexual orientation have tended to focus on a badly defined concept of nature, because different sex intercourses generally results in the propagation of the species. We award it to a special moral status, but nature doesn't reveal to us our moral obligations. We are responsible for determining those, even when we weren't aware we were doing so. To lead from an observation of how nature is to a prescription of how nature ought to be is, as philosopher David Hume noted, to commit a logical fallacy. Why judge what is nature and ethical to a human being by his or her animal nature? Many things human beings value, such as medicine and art, are egregiously unnatural. At the same time, humans detest many things that are eminently natural, like disease and death. If we consider some naturally occurring phenomena ethical and others unethical, that means our minds, the things looking, are determining what to make of nature, the things being looked at. Nature doesn't exist somewhere out there independently of us. We're always interpreting it from the inside. Yeah, I just like that quote. Do you have anything else to add on that?
I find it interesting. Yeah, I think it's an interesting article. It's kind of funny the way that society is, where, let's say 10 years ago, if you were to say, oh, homosexuality isn't determined by nature, you would be bashed hardcore by gay activists.
Yeah.
They'd be like, no, it's not a choice. It's not this. Like, they would be very upset. And now this person is kind of making a shift in the paradigm where it's, if you say it is a natural thing, something that you just have, well, that's a bad thing to say because, and I just think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I like it kind of says it. We don't know what causes sexuality.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know. I just kind of, that's the thing that would be something I would find interesting. This is kind of like it's kind of wishy-washy, where it's just like, like it's saying society's ever changing and it's hard to say where it'll go next.
Yeah.
But I find it interesting, but ultimately kind of.
I think what this is something that I kind of run into in anthropology a lot, or like maybe history at times, is the fact that like we consider these things like humans to be something like we're naturally this or naturally that, but we find that culture kind of defines and tells us what that actually is, or even language in general and how that kind of changes. Like the one thing I was talking to my dad about was what's his name? So yeah, we were talking about Jordan Peterson. He's a well-known clinical psychologist, and he's been making a lot of runs of lately within not just like academic circles, but also within like what's it called like outside of academia as well, kind of streaming into like what's it called like mainstream like media and things of that nature. And so he likes to talk a lot about the reason why there's a gender gap, or like just he likes to talk like gender gap. He likes to talk about like sexual orientation and things of that nature, and like other things.
She's
like
a sociologist.
yeah, he tries to be a sociologist, but like from a psychologist point of view. And so one of the things, this is just one example, but this is like the way in which he kind of talks about these things. He was talking about the reason why there's a gender gap, and it's because is that like the reason why is because women are not assertive, and I wish I can do the entire thing justice. I would like to go back and play the clip, but pretty much he talks about how there's something within women, like as a psychology thing, that they're not assertive, and the reason why they don't want to get these higher paid jobs, either be like a engineer or whatever, is because they're not like they don't have like the same assertiveness as men. And he
Mm.
was not saying like it's something as like he says he wants gender equality, but yet there's like this thing that within women that for some reason they don't want to do it. And from what I got from it, it was like this thing that was like something naturally embedded with them. Like
Okay.
like he was funny because he was saying that just because you have like if you have like a what's it called, like he was talking about like in Norway I think it was, or one of those Nordic countries, how they literally have like a socialist system where pretty much everyone
Hmm.
gets a college education, and like it's pretty much like a equal society.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how even there, like it's shown that even though like that women gravitate to different jobs, like there's more female doctors than there are male doctors, and there's more male
Hmm.
engineers than there are with female engineers. And so he was kind of saying that like this is an example of like how women are inherently different and they want different things. But then
Okay.
what I would argue, and I think what this thing does very well, is that it kind of like when we make these grand narratives about how men and women are, I feel like you're taking away a big part of the way in which you kind of act in everyday life, and I think that's like culture.
Hmm.
Um, like if we're to bring the women for not being assertive, not wanting to be CEOs or whatever, like we have to remember like how long has a patriarchal society been in the United States or even in Western Europe? You know what I'm saying? Where like women didn't get these types of jobs. They didn't get like leadership jobs within businesses. They usually become like race car drivers. They usually didn't become athletes, or they usually didn't become engineers. Women were known as caregivers. Maybe that's why one way why a lot of them, well, a lot more of them were considered to be doctors than maybe men, because and
Hmm.
even it's funny this we if we're bringing this even back to like what we did last week when we talked about the girls who were breaking code, like that was considered something that like men wouldn't do or something below men, and yet these women did these jobs or whatever, or even
Hmm.
like factory jobs where like that was something the man went and did and whatever. Maybe women did it too, but it was like man's work essentially. And
It was
then
man's work except for during the war,
exactly, I
essentially.
think women did it too, but I think more men did it than women probably.
I think it was really rare.
Yeah,
I think they were usually not allowed to work in a factory,
yeah.
frankly.
Um, unless you count the like the what's it called, what's it called where they make the silk, or not silk, but it was like in
Paint?
England. What's it called?
The paint.
No, not paint.
No?
Where they have like it's like it's these from cotton, and it was like in England, the threading machines or
Cotton.
whatever. I forget what it's called, but like make
Like a seamstress?
kind of like that. It was like make fabric or whatever. Maybe for
Okay.
women for that job,
That's true.
but what I'm saying is that like I think when you make these grand narratives within that idea, you kind of forget culture and the way in which humans have kind of not only humans within a society act, and also take for granted history. Because
Hmm.
if you say that the reason why women don't want these jobs is because they're not assertive enough, or they have this inherent thing within them that makes them different from men that does not allow them to get these
Hmm.
jobs, you have to take into account the patriarchal society that's been there for almost hundreds and hundreds of years. And you just can't take those things off within 10 to 20 years. It takes maybe another 100 years
Hmm.
for that type of norm to kind of go away in a sense.
Well, see, I find that interesting. So when you were talking about it, I thought maybe you were going to mention. I thought maybe the guy had some kind of studies or something, like
Yeah.
thorough studies about chemistry of the brain or something.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I'm very open to, like, I personally, I think, as of right now, I think that it is just a cultural thing. I think it's a cultural societal thing where just women are raised to be a little more submissive, basically. But if someone found that, like, oh, this chemical that is like a female chemical, or like, oh, testosterone makes you more aggressive or assertive, and since they have less, they end up being less assertive. If someone found something like that, I would be open to like believing that.
Yeah. But then again,
But
what in this article it talks about how us as humans associate what testosterone means. You know what I'm saying?
well, I mean, we kind of know what testosterone does.
It makes you more like angry or whatever, but like,
Well, I mean, okay, it can make you more angry, but it builds muscle. There's a lot of biological things that we know for a fact that it does.
yeah.
Testosterone exists in both men and women. There's just far more in men.
Yeah. but then again, we dictate what testosterone means to the human race. I mean, in race is more muscle that does those things. But
I mean, testosterone is a specific hormone. I mean, we know exactly how many carbons it has. We know exactly what it's shaped like. It's not like we're just saying testosterone and letting it mean whatever it wants to mean.
But yeah, I guess
go. It is the name of a very specific molecule. It's just because we named it doesn't mean that it's suddenly wobbly.
So I want to bring back this article when it says, but nature doesn't reveal to us our moral obligations. We are responsible for determining those, even when we weren't aware we're doing so. So what I'm basically saying is that society and culture is the way in which we kind of view the world we live in. It's the kind of lenses for us. We identify things wrong, bad. This is interesting. This is something new to us, based on our own traditions, our own culture, and the history traditions that have been passed down, going forward and forward. And we might not even know about those things, like all the biases we have and all the non-biases we have, experiences, for example. And every single person, every single culture has different ways of viewing those things that we see. So I think I'm not saying psychologists are not beneficial or whatever, but I think that sometimes they kind of take those types of things for granted in a sense, because they consider themselves scientists and they kind of understand the way in which the human body and brain works. But when you try to make these grand narratives about all humans or all women or anything like that, or within all Western society, or trying to say the typical man or typical woman, which doesn't really make any sense because there's no such thing there's no such thing as a typical man, because you know what I'm saying? It just falls apart with is that person a typical man? How about this person? How about this person? How about that person? I don't know. I have problems with people making those grand narratives when they fail to bring culture and history together. But then when you try to bring those things together, you start to see those types of narratives fall apart because it doesn't work there, it doesn't work there, it doesn't work there. You know what I'm saying? So
psychology is usually a very generalized thing. Especially a lot of times it'll be this is how this culture acts about stuff.
Yeah.
But there are some universal, just human things. There's just things that all humans share, regardless of culture.
I mean, we all give birth. We all have.
Psychologically, there are some things that we all share.
Yeah, we all want to survive. So if we need to fight, if someone's trying to kill us, or
even something as simple as smiling means happiness. True. That's a universal trait.
True. I'm not saying there's something when we were all human. We definitely do share something. If we didn't share something, we'd be a different species or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think that I think there's a lot more difference in terms of the way we act and interact with each other and what we consider right and wrong. I think those things differentiate been a lot more similar, I guess you can say. Or we all know if we wave to somebody. Oh, I don't know. If you took, let's say, a baby who was born in a cave,
okay,
and then let's say you put them out in nature, would they know these things naturally though, or
what things?
If would they know that smiling means happy?
Yes. Even blind babies smile.
Oh, okay. Even though they weren't.
There are seven universal emotions that all cultures share.
Okay.
It's smiling. I think it's happy, angry, sad. Disgust is one of them. I don't remember the rest.
Okay. Yeah. But I don't know. That's kind of what I feel on that type of subject. You know what I'm saying? So you have to, if you're gonna make those grand narratives, you have to take history and culture into your argument, because I think that really does shape up the arithmetic when you're trying to make up these arguments essentially.
Yeah, and I think psychologists do try to keep those in mind, but I don't know, it's hard. That's why I think most psychologists will qualify things with this is how this culture acts. Where it's okay, I had, even if you test, I tested 100,000 people, it's okay, and they were all American. So therefore I can conclude that, that this thing about Americans, something like that.
But then you have to take into account, how was America developed and how did those cultural, traditions that are passed back from America in history and the different events that happened and changed the way in which Americans think and feel, you have to put that into your arithmetic, not just because they're all Americans. There's a certain, story to it.
I think for an analysis of the study, you would have to. I don't think for the study itself, you really have to.
I know, but I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just my point of it. You can.
Yeah, no, I agree. Human emotions and cultures and stuff can be very, very complicated.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't remember what our point was, or like what
So
our.
the reason why and also kind of connects to also if we had tied into Black History Month, for example,
Okay.
before it was normal for there to be slaves. It was normal for us to think that black people could not do the same things that there was and even in the 1930s, for example, there was this perception that white athletes, black athletes are no better than white athletes because of their color of their skin. I'm not saying that's still the case now, but it's all about your training, your diet, and how much you portray into that craft. And it is more that than actual race. But before then, it was thought that if you're a white person, of course you're gonna be faster. If you're black, you're the more uncivilized human being, so you should not be you know what I'm saying? Those are perceptions.
Yeah.
That's something that psychologists would say about those people. Those types of things.
I don't know about that. You're saying psychologists at the time would say that?
If psychology was around at that time, it probably wasn't.
Kind of around.
It was kind of around, but it was in a different way though.
Yeah, that was depending on what we're talking about. We're talking about the Freud era. It sounds like.
Yeah.
That's when it was first starting.
But I bet I would not be. I would not. I would give a guess that's something they would say about. They would kind of just use the culture.
I want to say that psychologists usually don't comment on the physical abilities of people.
But I think that when they talk about those people, they kind of bring those types of ideas into their argument regarding those people.
I don't think that's the case. There was this pseudoscience that was created for a period of time, and I cannot for the life of me remember what it was called. It essentially amounted to the study of different human species, is essentially what the name implies.
Yeah.
Where it's the different humans from different parts of the world are different species is sort of what they were. That was the basis of this science.
Yeah.
Now they would certainly comment on the physicality and stuff of people. I don't think psychologists usually do that.
Well, then again, if we were to bring anthropology, the creation of anthropology, for example, anthropology was pretty much created by colonizing empires of Europe or the United States.
I think the thing I'm talking about became anthropology. Actually, I just can't remember what it's called.
I think so because there was several people wrote books on the ordering of the cultures and things like that nature and what's the order of civilization. That kind of became anthropology, but basically that study fused into another study to basically create anthropology. Anthropology was used to pretty much look at the human races, pretty much justify and show how they can kind of not only rule them, but the reasons for how they can rule them and things like that.
And the reasons for why it was moral to rule them.
Exactly. That's pretty much why anthropology was great. The good example is remember we used to measure skull sizes and brain sizes, show the white skull was bigger than the.
Yes. Okay, that's exactly the thing I was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yes.
What I'm saying is that I think that's something that I think if psychology was around at that time, I would say that I think they would take those types of. They might not comment on the black skin, but they would probably use those types of those things with society, those perceptions. The academics perceptions they had at that time, they would probably take that into consideration, without them knowing probably, when they made comments about people with that skin color or whatever. They probably won't.
I see what you're saying, but I feel like if psychology existed at the time, I feel like it would be basically a completely. In fact, psychology did kind of exist at that time.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different field from what it is now.
Yeah.
Freud was essentially the father of psychology, and everything he said was wrong.
Yeah.
So, I guess I kind of see what you're saying, but
what I'm saying is that even though you exist within let's say a social, I think that's more like social science, right? So social scientists, whenever they comment on something, it's almost hard for them to be kind of unbiased because typically you have your own biases, even though you don't want to admit them essentially, and you're basically you're basically providing an opinion on something, even though it might be on facts. From what you believe and from what you've gone through in your own experiences or whatever, that's basically what I'm saying. The social norms exist within your culture and within your society. You're bringing those things in when you're judging someone's ethnicity or the situation that's going on. Essentially, that's basically what I'm saying.
Okay. I agree.
So I guess we can talk about things that are kind of interesting going beyond that. We'll kind of touch back on the subject on the back end of this, but I want to talk about some interesting things that have happened. So for some reason, I've been liking like a lot of. I think when looking at like not prehistory, let's say like ancient history. I think ancient history like survives a lot on what's it called archaeology, for example. So one cool thing that happened in Guatemala is that they used something called it was like an underground radar thing. It's called lidar.
Yeah, I like how it's called lidar.
Lidar. So what they found is that using laser technology that was used to survey digitally beneath the forest canopy, they found let's see, trying to see. It says the researchers mapped over 810 square miles in northern Petén, and let's try to see. We're trying to see what they found really quickly. Doesn't say. But from they found 60,000 hidden Mayan ruins in Guatemala, which is like huge. And pretty much what they're saying is that like pretty much the population they thought they had, but I think they thought it was like 4 million, can be a lot more.
many more.
many more. I'm trying to see what the number that they gave. Okay, it says that with the new data, it says it's no longer unreasonable to think that there were 10 to 15 million people living there. It says the most of the 60,000 newly identified structures are thought to be stone platforms that would have supported the average Pole and Thatch Maya house. And so it says the archaeologists were also struck by incredible defensive features, which included walls, fortresses, and moats.
Did they have the thing where it shoots darts out of the wall?
I don't know.
And then if you grab the totem, a boulder chases after you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that'd be pretty awesome. I'm trying to see. It's funny because this work was so amazing. This what's it called? This discovery was so amazing that he said one of the guys, I think it was the guy was professor of archaeology and anthropology, Brand Newsbury, Stephen Houston. He says he thinks is one of the greatest advances in over 150 years of Mayan archaeology, and he states that it was breathtaking. He added, I know it sounds like a hyperbolic or whatever, but when I saw the lidar imagery, he said it did bring him to tears. It did bring tears to his eyes.
Wow.
Yeah. And so how it works, lidar is sometimes described as magic by some archaeologists. I bet it's because they're not scientists or whatever. They don't know what computer science is or whatever.
Yep, it's a brand new radar that lies to you.
Oh yes.
Introducing lidar.
It says that it's a sophisticated remote sensing technology that uses laser light to densely sample the surface of the Earth. Millions of laser pulses every 4 seconds are beamed at the ground from a plane or helicopter. The wavelength are measured as they bounce back, which is not unlike how bats use sonar to hunt. It says the highly accurate measurements are then used to produce a detailed three-dimensional image of the ground surface topology. It's funny because even though this is all cool enough, I'm trying to see what it's pretty much. They said the tricky thing about lidar is that it gives us an image of 3,000 years of Mayan civilization in the area comprised. But pretty much what they're saying is that pretty much there's a whole bunch of shit they have to go through now. What they're saying is a good thing because that's new information they never knew. And it's crazy because
it's better to have data than none.
Yeah, exactly. And they're saying it's crazy because they would have never ever seen these things. And he says one of the things is at the mine site called El Zote. That's what the area is called.
Okay.
It says we're talking about the fortification wall in general. It says the lidar survey revealed kilometers of fortification wall that the team had never even noticed. And it says maybe eventually we would have gotten to this hilltop with the way in which they look for archaeological digs, eventually digging pretty much. It says where the fortress is, but I was within about 100 feet of it in 2010 and didn't see anything. So that's pretty cool, and it's kind of showing that they're even as advanced. It says the results from this research using lidar technology, which is sort of light detection ranging, suggests that Central America has supported an advanced civilization more akin to sophisticated cultures like ancient Greece or China. And it says everything is turned on its head, according to Itch College archaeologist Thomas Gilshan. That is awesome. That's
crazy. Yeah,
that's pretty awesome. I think because when you look at Mayan culture, You kind of think of it as like I'm not sure. It was Aztecs and Mayan, right? I think. Yeah. Yeah, the Mayans were the last ones. Let me just check really quick.
What? No, the Aztec were the
Aztecs were the last ones.
The Aztec Empire. Yeah, they were like very recent.
I get confused.
Mayans are ancient.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, 1521. You're right. Boom. So yeah, when it comes to like ancient civilizations, like you kind of think that like it was Greece, Rome, and like those were, or China, for example. Those were like the civilized. They had like their walls. They had like their law. They had like their institutions, pretty much. They had their civilization, their cities. But now, if you kind of, and that's kind of like it's kind of seen as like the European dominance of history. That's kind of, or European Eurasia, kind of has the dominance of like.
I'm gonna say China's not Europe.
Yeah, I changed it. Eurasia. It's called Eurasia, guys. Or maybe Euro-Africa Asia.
It's not my Asia, it's Eurasia.
it probably even called Euro-Africa Asia because technically Africa is connected to Asia via the Sinai Peninsula. So I don't know why that name has not caught on yet, but that's we'll
yeah. Oh yeah. Gee, I wonder why.
You're Asia, Africa.
Your Afro is Asia, man.
But I think that kind of changes the narrative in a sense because now you can kind of include the Mayan civilization as a part of that conversation.
I find that interesting. Did you not learn about like the American civilizations when you were in like elementary school?
I did, but I think when you kind of, if you were kind of like label them as like the most advanced civilizations, you would probably list Greece and China within those categories, right?
Well, I mean, they're the ones who invented like gunpowder and steel armor and stuff.
But then again, also Asia had like the cereals, like they had corn, they had like potatoes, and that allowed them to kind of grow in a higher civilization. I'm not sure if the Mayans had potatoes. I think they did.
I'm actually not sure. Honestly, when I learned about them, I always kind of grouped the Mayans with the Egyptians.
Yeah.
In my mind.
Yeah. But I think that kind of changed. Like I think now this idea of advanced civilizations can now be spread a lot more evenly than just being centered on Europe and China. You can kind of now include the other Egyptians, for example, can build huge-ass pyramids with alien technology. Just kidding. I don't know about that. And now the Aztecs or the Mayans can now be included in that category. I would not want to do ancient history. I would not.
Too much. Too much of it.
It would suck because like there's not a lot of documentation to go on essentially. So pretty much you have like maybe half a document. And like, there's like, okay, let's see what this means. Like, you can mean anything. You know what I'm saying? Especially like if it was funny because we were doing ancient Japan right now. That's one of the classes I'm taking. And so of course things don't last that long, especially if they're written on paper. Pretty much.
Well, yeah.
Except there's recycled paper which used some type of chemical. I forget what lacquered. It was lacquered, I think. Of course that survives. But the thing is that our professor was telling us that like. Pretty much like maybe like a sentence or two would remain of an entire document, and like historians have to pretty much piece together what that means.
Didn't we read about that in last week with the Egyptian trash pile?
Oh yeah. That's why I would not want to do ancient history because it's like there's so much that's like not there, and so you're pretty much just like guessing. It's like I think this has happened. I don't know. This is what the archaeological data tells us. Like I don't know, that would just suck. Like there's just like nothing. It feels like science are just like, no, that's just my thing on it. That's why that's why doing like almost modern, almost either modern or pre-modern history because at least there's documents that survive.
What's considered pre-modern?
Pre-modern's like, I would have to say probably the 1400s, probably. Renaissance up to maybe the Enlightenment. Technically, I'm modern. I'm between modern and pre-modern with 1800s. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking of modern history. I think, because 19th century. So I'm doing modern history now. But like, it's funny because my examples like my professor's doing he's in modern history. He's in World War I very much, and like the French and the Germans, everyone like created so much documentation from that war. So it's easy to like gather information or like data from that conflict to kind of, or from that era, for example. So you just gather like documentation on like to support your arguments essentially. But like as you go back in time, there's less documentation to go around. So a lot of times you do a lot more guesswork than actual like this is my evidence for what it shows, and I can show you pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Another cool thing that I found, and you kind of mentioned this before, was the fact that the Black Death was not spread by humans, but was not spread by rats, but it was spread by humans. And so it was considered, and this is something that like even up to like even when I was learning history, like in maybe 2 years ago, I was taking like a general European history or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it was that belief that like rats came from ships from Asia and pretty much landed in Europe, and that spread through ticks jumping off rats onto humans, and then that's how pretty much the Black Death started. So if you guys don't know what the Black Death is, it was a large plague that
was the plague.
The plague, the Ultra Plague. It claimed an estimated 25 million lives and more than a third of Europe's population between 1347 and 1351. People have said that like the Black Death probably caused the Renaissance and like the creation of like the nation state and like those types of things. So like because
that was nice of it.
Well, because it like changed like the social fabric of Europe at that time.
Who knew the Black Death was so enlightened?
I know, right? So this is how they kind of found out this information. You kind of told us this before. This was kind of more central information you can say is that he says we have this is I think the two universities it is were the universities of Ulsa and Ferrara. I think both of them are probably Italian. I think. Or Ulsa. Or I mean Norwegian. I'm not sure. But
I don't know about Ulsa. Okay, go ahead.
It says we have good mortality data from the outbreaks in 9 cities in Europe. Professor Neil Sineth from the University of Oslo told BBC News. So we could construct models of the disease dynamics there. So he and his colleagues then simulated disease outbreaks in each of the cities, creating 3 models where the disease was spread by rats, airborne transmissions, fleas, lice that live on humans and their clothes. It says in 7 of the 9 cities studied, the human parasite model was a much better match for the pattern of outbreak. It mirrored how quickly it spread and how many people affected. The conclusion was very clear, said Professor Sineth. The lice model fits best. And it would be unlikely to spread as fast as it did if it was transmitted by rats. It would have to go through an extra loop of the rats rather than being spread from person to person. And so what this kind of does is it kind of shares like how to kind of prevent more outbreaks. And so Professor Sinnes said the study was preliminary historical interest, using modern understanding of disease to unpick what had happened during one of the most devastating pandemics in human history. But he pointed out, understanding as much as possible about what goes on during an epidemic is always good if you're to reduce mortality rate in the future. Plague is still like an endemic in some countries of Asia and Africa and the Americas, where it persists in reservoirs. According to the WHO, or the World Health Organization, from 2010 to 2015, there were 3,248 cases reported worldwide, including 584 deaths. It says in 2001, a study that decoded the plague genome used a bacteria that had come from a vet in the U.S. who had died in 1992 after a plague-infested cat sneezed on him as he was trying to rescue it underneath a house. I don't know why he would do that, but okay.
Well, he's a vet. He was trying to be nice. He was like, I can take this kitty in and I can cure it.
Again.
And it will be my best friend. And then it sneezed on him and he keeled over.
Again, that's why you should not trust cats.
Oh, I have a cat sitting next to me, though. Oh. He's not too evil.
He might give you the plague.
Nah, he's not plague infested.
Not to my knowledge. It says, our study suggests that to prevent future spread, hygiene is most important. He also suggests that if you're ill... Hygiene. It also suggests that if you're ill, you shouldn't come into contact with too many people. So if you're sick, stay at home.
If you have the plague, please stay home. Yeah, really useful advice for the modern age.
What's your take on that? That's pretty cool, though. It kind of changes, like how much more things of history that we not know that, that.
Well, I mean, honestly, what's interesting is the way that they figured out this thing is they just did a bunch of really complex models about it. Mm-hmm. This wasn't even like, we found a document saying that someone sneezed on them and they die. When it comes to giant catastrophic events like this, you can't really dig up anything and to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
It's like you either have to find a time machine or you have to find some way to model it. Now, for most human events, that's kind of impossible. But for something like a plague, with everything that we know about germ theory and stuff now, it's possible to model things now, and that's really interesting. I find that really cool.
And here's one thing I would like to say is that like before we historians kind of thought of like the Black Death being an example of like not only did trade bring goods and also like transmission of ideas, but also transmit. It was like one of the first big ways in which diseases were transmitted. Because we know now that like disease can go from one place to another via especially with like airplanes and ships. It's a lot easier for a disease or people of that nature to travel from one part of the world and bring that thing to another. Like, I wonder if that is like still the case. If it's still
well,
be seen.
I mean, here's the question. Okay, so we're fairly certain now, based on these models, that the disease was spread within the population by humans.
Yeah.
But how did it arrive?
Yeah.
Because like that vet, it could have arrived via animal. There could have been a rat who started the whole plague.
Yeah, there we go.
They just didn't, take it all around Europe.
Yeah. So I think that when it adds one little, because it's fun because a lot of people thought that like the reason why, of course, people thought that it was spread by rats, and there was a funny thing where it was thought that like one of the reasons why I was able to spread is because they didn't have a lot of cats to eat the rats, because cats were kind of seen as like evil characters, or like they just didn't keep them around essentially.
They're too busy guarding Egypt
or whatever. So they thought that some people thought that like, they didn't have enough cats to kill the rats, so that's one of the reasons why a whole bunch of Europeans died. It's like, well, no, you guys were just silly. I mean, you guys were just not silly, but you guys were just like dirty Europeans who didn't know hygiene, and that's how you guys died, pretty much.
Yeah, or like they also oh god, I forget what it's called. Oh my god, the people who would walk around with the whips and chains and hit themselves while walking around town, or walking around the entire countries. Usually, even they would go from city to city, and they're like, the plague is God punishing us. We must punish ourselves instead, and then they'd spread the disease.
Or it was funny because like the disease was disease was so bad that like even in Germany, like they believed that it was the Jews poisoning the wells. Okay. So what they did is that I think
is that where the fear of water comes from? I always wonder. Okay, because my German teacher told us like, oh yeah, there was some kind of really bad outbreak, some kind of disease, and now Germans don't drink from tap water anymore. They're afraid of it, just culturally afraid of it, not like personally.
I'm not sure, but like literally what happened is that they were afraid that the Jews were like contaminating their water, and like so pretty much they rounded up a bunch of the Jews. I'm not sure if they killed them, but I know they kind of drove them out of the city at least. But yeah, that's one of the causes of it. It's like, no, you fools, you guys are doing it to yourselves. Like, go take a bath, go create soap, and like.
Yeah, didn't we read an article recently where it was like King Louis or someone, like they didn't take baths because they were afraid that that's where germs came from, like from still water.
I'm not sure. I don't think we read.
What was it? Oh, God, I don't remember what it was related to anymore. Are you too many random things? I swear it was something that we talked about. I don't think we talked about that aspect of it, but God dang it. It was one of the kings of France. And they like, the physicians at the time were like, they kind of almost had it right, where they're like, oh, germs exist.
Okay.
But like in the water, and it was like he didn't take baths. Instead, he did something.
Well, before, like, germ theory didn't exist.
I think, well, no, I know, but it was like, what I mean is they were close to it. they were like, there's something in the water. They probably thought it was like an aura or something, but they're close.
I don't.
But
maybe.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
Okay, I think it was the same person who every morning when they got up, people watched them wake up, and they like had a whole ritual about it.
Who?
Every morning they woke up, and like they had like civilians would watch them like get dressed and eat and like get ready for the morning.
Huh. I would have to look back.
I don't remember.
I would have to look back for that one, but yeah, it's interesting to see that like that was
hygiene was actively feared at certain points in time.
Yeah. I wonder if that happened in the Roman times, or if at all, because they had baths.
They did. I don't know if they were used. I don't know how. I always thought that was more of a cultural thing, where it was like, let's meet at the baths.
I'm gonna look this up. I actually want to know, when was soap invented?
When was soap
invented?
Invented?
Yeah.
That's a heck of a question.
I'm gonna ask Google right now. When was soap invented? Probably like
2800 BC.
2800 BC.
There we go.
I beat you.
Soap. A soap-like material found in clay cylinders.
Damn. So it's possible the Romans could have had
During
it, right?
the excavation of ancient Babylon is evident. Yeah, so soap has existed forever. I mean, so soaps are literally just made of fat.
Mm-hmm.
Just fat is able to dissolve oils, and it helps. And then combine that with the water, and you end up washing everything off.
Did the Romans have soap?
Here's a summary from BBC News. Instead, medical men from ancient Greece and Arab countries used it as a skin balm, as did the Romans.
It says Romans did use soap. Or
it says that they preferred to use oil.
I don't know if that would work or whatever.
It says Romans' preferred method of cleaning the body was to massage oil into the skin and scrape it away with a strigil.
What the fuck?
I don't know. Strigil was the curved blade used especially by ancient Greeks and Romans. I don't know what the hell that is. A strigil. The Gauls used soap. I don't know who the Gauls are.
They're French. Ancient. They're like the French people or the Germanic peoples.
See, well, the Gauls had soap.
So soap existed then. So they were cleanly.
So strigil looks like a hook, a very blunt hook. A scraping hook.
I wonder if that
it looks like something you'd use to help put on a shoe.
Oh, okay.
Looks like a shoehorn.
Okay. So I guess that's with the medieval Europeans didn't have soap, and that's why they go whole bunch of what's it called contaminations and diseases. So I think you guys want to avoid, if your civilization wants to avoid disease, invent soap and hygiene, and you guys should be good. You should not have that many plagues.
Chill in the rivers, and you can poison all the people downstream of you.
Brilliant. Before we get on to our last thing, I'd like to state what happened today. This is something I should have done in the beginning.
Okay.
For these podcasts, we'll probably do like either a top 10 list or maybe a thing that happened that day. So today was the Battle of Stalingrad, where the Nazis were stopped in their invasion of Russia, and that pretty much changed the entire tide of the war. So, interesting note there. So for our last article, since it is Black History Month, there was an article in the Huffington Post that came out today that American students aren't learning the full truth about slavery. It says American students are being taught an inadequate and often sanitized version of history when it comes to slavery, according to a new report from Southern Poverty Law Center. Looks how slavery is presented in K through 12 classrooms, and found that students are often taught a deeply incomplete versions of events. Students learn inspirational stories about figures like Harriet Tubman and Good Samaritans who helped slaves reach freedom and the Underground Railroad before they learn about the horrors of enslavement. When they learn about slavery, it is often presented as an isolated, unfortunate phenomenon, disconnected from white supremacist ideologies that abetted and racism that continues as a pervasive part of American life today. Only 8% of high school seniors surveyed by an independent polling firm of the study of identified slavery as the primary reason for the Civil War. Almost half identified tax protests as the main cause. Hold on, wait, it's 8%? So a lot of people don't think that slavery was the only reason for... Oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this, and it's from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Are these is this just a look at the southern states? I'm curious.
Interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it says. Maybe. Yeah, it could be a possibility. But it says,
I looked through the article and it never mentioned. It mentions a lot of statistics, but it never mentions.
You can probably look it up as I read this out.
I tried to, and I couldn't find it. Like it links you to the article.
Yeah.
Let's say where they were getting their statistics from.
Okay.
It's like I want like a section about method.
But it says that the study also reviewed 15 states content standards and 10 popular U.S. history books. It found that while some states did better than others, they generally demanded only superficial level teaching on the subject of slavery. Textbooks were similarly problematic. It says while more than 90% of surveyed teachers said they feel comfortable talking about slavery in their classrooms, many teachers revealed a higher level of discomfort in answers to open-ended questions, especially when dealing with young children. One person said, I focus on the resistance factors more to avoid the children being scared by man's humanity to man. I don't want to steal any child's innocence, though I want to make sure that children know the real history of their country, wrote one teacher. The impact of inadequate teaching about slavery does not end when students leave the classroom. It contributes to how they see the world, the country's distribution of power, and institutions around them. It's not simply an event in our history, it's central to our history. The report notes fixing the way slavery is taught in schools has a specific urgency at this moment in history amid surging white nationalism. This report says understanding and facing history is an essential step for alleviating the indelible stain slavery has left in our country. If we don't get the early history of our country right, we are unlikely to be equipped doing the heavy lifting necessary. And this is an article. This article by trying to find the person's name. By Rebecca Klein. So pretty much what I'm getting from this is that they only know slavery as like this kind of sucked for us, but it is like only one moment within our history lifestyle that like was kind of us being bad, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it's saying.
But in reality, slavery has been literally a part of our history since like Jamestown,
since
pretty
the
much.
beginning.
Literally
since what?
Since Jamestown. Like I think that's when the first African Americans. They might even have his name.
I actually don't know.
What's your take on this? As I look up this guy.
Look, what? What?
What's your take on this?
Oh, what's my take on this? Oh, I'm so curious about who they looked at, because when I see this where it's like, oh, when I see that the majority of the students say that there was economic reasons, that screams to me Southern, like the way that the South has changed their history books, especially since it's by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm like, is this just the South? Because when it mentions the other states, they were looking at the curriculum standards. They didn't actually look at what was specifically being taught in those other states.
I'll look it up right now. But
so it's like they're looking at 1,000 students, and like a huge majority of them are like, oh no, slavery wasn't really a big deal for the Civil War. It was all about economics. I'm like, to me that sounds like the recent change in Texas's history book, or like what people in Louisiana and Alabama are being taught. I'm curious, like, if this is a problem, how big of a problem is across the whole country, and how big of a problem how big of a problem it is in more localized areas.
Center. I found the website.
It's a big deal. I'm just curious. It's all.
Yeah.
I think it sort of changes, like fundamentally changes what the implications of the article are.
Yeah, I think it would exist more in. I think it's also a general human thing too, because, not a human thing, but history thing, because like, I think because slavery is one of those topics in American history, because I think American history likes to be very, like, we're the best, we're cool at everything or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like that's why history is generally created, to basically show not only why you exist, but how you exist and why you
why you deserve to exist.
Exactly. Why do you deserve to exist? And let's say anything else, like, or like an example is like we talk about Nazism, right? Like a lot of times we talk about this idea of like how I don't know what I was taught in high school history, but what I do know is that but like I would not be surprised within American U.S. history when we talk about the Second World War, that there would be a lot of schools who would talk about the Nazis. As you know, or hopefully some people don't know, is that a lot of the procedures and the way in which they classified other races and the way in which they kind of try to create an uber race, or the what they call the Aryan race. They used a lot of American, actually Californian, what's it called? Genetics? No, sorry. Genealogy. There we go. Like the way in which they try to create, have like certain people like made to create a certain human being, right? Or like even like euthanizing like undesirables, essentially, right? Like that's something that's like sheds a very bad light on us as Americans, to know that type of thing perpetuated and created something else in the future.
I guess.
I'm not sure if I would not be surprised if that's something that they don't talk about. Maybe they don't touch on a lot.
Well, no, I wouldn't. I mean, I don't know. That sounds more like, the Germans misapplied American science. I'm not even sure if that's science. I'm not exactly sure what.
But what I'm trying to say is that like I think this is with all history.
I think if you wanted to say something like that, you could talk about like the Japanese internment camps.
Yeah, I mean
something like that.
I think that's the thing where like we're afraid to talk about our own faults, and we're afraid to say that we've made very shitty mistakes and we've done shitty things to people all around the world. And I think it's from this American exceptionalism that we're better than every other country, so we have very few faults, if not any faults, and that's why we're still around because of our like enlightened position in the world. Like like examples like all like the I'll give you an example like we consider like all these other countries for like spreading war and disaster and like doing other things. Well, America has done the same exact thing to other nations. Like I'll give you like the Philippines, for example, right? Like the U.S. got the Philippines after the Spanish American War, but what a lot of people don't tell you is that like we brought democracy to those areas, whatever. But what happened is actually like an insurgency occurred on the islands. And a lot of times the American Marines and the forces there would actually resort to like burning down entire villages to like stamp out the insurgency and like all these shitty things that they did. And it's not very different from what the Japanese did in World War II. Also, what we do with their CIA activities. Remember, we were taking the U.S. government about the Americans, called the American School, I think it was called, or something like that, and how all these different coups and like supporting all these rebel groups who like literally killed entire villages, supporting it. Like I'm not sure if you're gonna find a lot of those in history classes, or maybe not talk about them a lot. And it comes from this American exceptionalism. And I think this points to one thing or whatever. I know I took AP US history, so I think I got a little bit more well-rounded than, let's say, the average student did, I think. I'm not sure what people did in regular history. But, that's just kind of what I got from this, is that, like, I think it's good to know that we, like, I don't know, it's good to know that we're like any other country where we have the same faults or whatever. But I think once you recognize it, and I think once you recognize that America is a very unique country, as in I think we're like the only few countries that has like such a diverse group of people who live in our country, and we have such a unique way in which we govern compared to other parts of the world. Even though it is kind of borrowed from the British parliamentary system, it is different though in itself. That we can change things and hopefully make the world a better place from that aspect. But you kind of have to know where we were and where we came from to kind of notice, oh, we fucked up really badly. Let's start making those changes. To better help our future and our future, generations going forward. That's kind of what I got from it. Anything else to add on that note?
Nope.
I think that's all I got for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I know we went on tangents, and I feel like we were a lot bit more on cue on like a certain topic and a certain idea. And I don't know. I think one of the lessons to be learned is that understand where you came from, understand the biases and the things that you've kind of grown up, the traditions, and not only know what has happened in the past, also know like what other people have done. There's been people in the world who have been surrounded by biases and these other things who said that they can't do it. Know that there's been people in the past who have had those same types of difficulties, and they decided to not let those things weigh them down and to pretty much decide that they're going to try to be the best that they can at that craft. And then that will shine through more than the color of their skin or any other type of negativity that society puts on them. And hopefully use that to then make society better, society more culturally, inclusive to different ideas and different ways of living. And hopefully more people smile and less people are in tears of sadness and disparity. I think that's the big lesson that we have every day and every day. Hope you guys enjoy the podcast. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.